There is a particular form of suffering that appears whenever someone withdraws their affection from us. Most people believe they suffer because the other person has become distant. They believe the pain comes from unanswered messages, from emotional absence, from uncertainty. But this is rarely the true source of the disturbance. If the withdrawal of another human being is capable of throwing your entire inner world into chaos, then something far older than the relationship itself has been touched. Something hidden has awakened. The avoidant person merely becomes the occasion. They become the spark that illuminates a part of the psyche that was already waiting in darkness. This is why some people can endure distance with dignity, while others become consumed by it. The event is often the same. The difference lies in what the event awakens.
And I want you to really feel the weight of that, because men do not arrive at this conclusion quickly. They do not arrive at it because of chemistry or attraction or because a conversation went well. They arrive at it through a slow, quiet accumulation of evidence that you are safe, that you are consistent, that you will not turn what he gives you against him. I used to think that intimacy between a man and a woman was built the same way on both sides, that you went deeper together, that you shared more, that the emotional vulnerability ran in both directions at the same pace. And then I started actually paying attention. And what I found was that for women, intimacy feels like an emotional experience. It lives in the sharing, in the resonance, in the sense of being understood. And for men, intimacy is built through trust. And trust is not an emotion, it is a conclusion, and it is reached through a very different process, one that is slower and less visible, and that women often...
They believed they were participating in love, yet what had often occurred was something far more dangerous. Without realizing it, they had transferred responsibility for their inner stability onto another human being. The moment that person withdrew, the entire structure began to collapse. The individual then assumes that the withdrawal itself is the catastrophe. Yet from a psychological perspective, the catastrophe occurred much earlier. It occurred the moment they unconsciously made another person responsible for maintaining contact with their own sense of value. The avoidant does not create this condition. The avoidant merely exposes it. Their distance reveals a dependency that had previously remained hidden beneath the excitement of connection. What appears to be a relationship crisis is often a confrontation with oneself. This is why emotional withdrawal provokes reactions that seem disproportionate to the circumstances. A delayed message becomes unbearable, a few days of silence become evidence of abandonment. The imagination begins constructing stories that reality itself has not provided. One imagines rejection, replacement, betrayal, humiliation. The psyche rushes to fill every empty space with fearful interpretations. In such moments, the individual believes they are responding to what is happening outside of them. In truth, they are responding primarily to what is happening within. The unconscious possesses a remarkable tendency to transform present events into gateways through which forgotten wounds return. The avoidant partner becomes connected to experiences that may have originated years earlier. Feelings once attached to parents, former lovers, authority figures, or childhood disappointments begin attaching themselves to the present situation. The individual does not merely experience today's distance, they experience the accumulated emotional weight of every similar experience that has never been fully understood. The psyche collapses time. What appears to be one relationship suddenly carries the emotional burden of many. This is where projection enters the picture. Projection is among the most powerful forces in human psychology because it prevents us from seeing both ourselves and others clearly. We imagine we are relating to the actual person before us, yet often we are relating to an image created by our unconscious. We invest them with extraordinary significance. We assign them the role of savior, judge, healer, rescuer, or source of completion. Then, when they inevitably fail to fulfill the role we unconsciously assign to them, we experience profound disappointment and confusion. The avoidant person frequently becomes the perfect vessel for such projections because their distance creates mystery. What is absent is easier to idealize than what is present. The less available they become, the more imagination rushes in to fill the void. The individual begins chasing not a person but an image, not reality but fantasy, not who the avoidant truly is, but who they unconsciously need them to be. A psychologically secure person encounters the same withdrawal, but experiences it differently because they do not derive their identity from the relationship. They may feel sadness, they may feel disappointment, they may even grieve, yet they remain connected to themselves. Their center of gravity remains within. They do not abandon their own life in pursuit of someone else's uncertainty. They do not treat another person's inability to connect as evidence of their own inadequacy. They understand that another person's behavior reveals something primarily about that person. This distinction is essential because the insecure reaction seeks immediate relief, whereas the secure reaction seeks understanding. One attempts to eliminate anxiety as quickly as possible. The other becomes curious about its source. One chases. The other observes. One becomes possessed by the emotional storm. The other studies it. The task of psychological development has never been to control other people. It has always been to understand the forces operating within ourselves. Therefore, the question is not why the avoidant pulls away. Human beings have withdrawn from intimacy throughout history for countless reasons. The deeper question is why their withdrawal possesses such power over your psyche. Why does it command your thoughts? Why does it threaten your peace? Why does it awaken fear rather than clarity? The answer is rarely found in the avoidant. It is found in the hidden regions of the self that their behavior has exposed, and it is there, rather than in the pursuit of another person, that genuine freedom begins. Once an individual recognizes that the avoidant's withdrawal has awakened something within them, a new possibility emerges. Yet this is also the point where most people turn back. They see the source of their suffering for a brief moment, but instead of continuing inward, they return their attention to the other person. They continue searching for explanations, signs, and strategies. They continue asking how to make the avoidant return, how to regain their interest, how to restore the connection. In doing so, they unknowingly repeat the very pattern that created the suffering in the first place. The energy that should be directed toward understanding the self is once again directed toward controlling another human being. The secure person makes a different move. From the outside, this difference often appears subtle. Both individuals experience disappointment. Both feel uncertainty. Both recognize the possibility of loss. Yet psychologically they are operating in entirely different worlds. The insecure individual immediately becomes fused with the emotion. The feeling takes possession of them. Their thoughts begin serving the fear. Their imagination begins serving the fear. Their actions begin serving the fear. Everything becomes organized around the urgent need to escape discomfort. The secure individual does not immediately obey the emotion. This does not mean they suppress it. It does not mean they become cold, detached, or indifferent. On the contrary, they allow themselves to feel what is happening. The difference is that they remain conscious while feeling it. They do not become the fear itself, they observe it. This distinction may sound simple, but it represents one of the most important psychological developments a human being can achieve. Throughout life, people are repeatedly overtaken by emotional forces they mistake for truth. Anger feels true. Jealousy feels true. Anxiety feels true. Rejection feels true. Yet the intensity of an emotion does not prove the accuracy of its message. Jung understood that the psyche contains autonomous forces that can temporarily overwhelm consciousness. He often describes situations in which individuals become possessed by complexes, clusters of unconscious emotions, memories, and beliefs that suddenly seize control of perception. When the avoidant pulls away, such a complex is often activated. The individual believes they are seeing reality objectively, but reality is now filtered through fear. Every silence becomes meaningful. Every delay becomes suspicious. Every uncertainty becomes evidence of impending abandonment. They are no longer responding to facts. They are responding to an emotional lens through which the facts are being interpreted. The secure person recognizes this danger. Instead of asking, "What does their behavior mean about me?" they ask a far more useful question: "What is happening inside me right now?" This shift changes everything. The attention moves away from the avoidant and returns to the self. Instead of chasing explanations, they become curious about their reaction. Instead of obsessing over the other person's motives, they examine their own emotional state. The focus is no longer external. It becomes internal. And in that moment, something remarkable begins to happen. The emotional storm gradually loses its authority, not because the situation has changed, not because the avoidant has returned, not because certainty has been restored. The storm weakens because consciousness has entered the picture. What remains unconscious controls us. What becomes conscious can be observed. The secure individual therefore understands that the first responsibility is not managing the relationship. The first responsibility is managing their relationship with themselves. Only after this psychological shift occurs do practical actions become useful. Most people search for techniques while remaining emotionally possessed. This is why even good advice often fails. A person can follow every relationship strategy in existence and still be driven by fear. They can remain silent while secretly obsessing. They can give space while internally panicking. They can appear calm while psychologically collapsing. The secure person approaches action differently because the action emerges from clarity rather than desperation. When an avoidant withdraws, the first tool is restraint, not the restraint of manipulation, but the restraint of consciousness. The secure person does not immediately send 5 messages attempting to force certainty. They do not demand reassurance. They do not interrogate the other person. They resist the impulse to act simply because anxiety demands action. Most impulsive behavior is not designed to solve problems. It is designed to reduce discomfort. The secure individual understands this and refuses to allow temporary emotions to dictate permanent behavior. The second tool is reality. The mind under emotional stress becomes highly creative. It generates stories, predictions, assumptions, and fears. The secure person repeatedly returns to observable facts. They separate what they know from what they imagine. They know the person has become distant. They do not know why. They know communication has changed. They do not know what conclusions should be drawn. This commitment to reality protects them from becoming trapped inside fantasies generated by fear. The third tool is maintaining one's own life. One of the most dangerous consequences of emotional attachment is psychological narrowing. The individual becomes so focused on the avoidant that everything else begins losing significance. Friendships fade into the background. Personal goals lose importance. Daily life becomes organized around waiting. The secure person refuses this temptation. They continue building their life even while uncertainty exists. They continue pursuing meaningful work. They continue nurturing friendships. They continue developing themselves. Their identity remains larger than the relationship. The fourth tool is clear communication. When communication becomes necessary, the secure person speaks honestly without pleading. They do not disguise anxiety as love. They do not disguise control as concern. They communicate directly and respectfully. If clarity is needed, they ask for it. If boundaries are needed, they establish them. If distance continues indefinitely, they acknowledge reality rather than endlessly negotiating with it. And perhaps the most important tool of all is self-respect. The secure person understands a truth that many discover only after years of suffering. Love cannot be extracted from another person through persistence. Intimacy cannot be created through pressure. Connection cannot be forced through sacrifice. Therefore, they do not abandon themselves in order to keep someone else. They remain open, but they do not chase. They remain compassionate, but they do not beg. They remain available, but they do not wait forever. For they understand that genuine security is not the confidence that another person will stay. It is the knowledge that even if they leave, you will not leave yourself. At the end of this journey, something unexpected happens. The secure person discovers that the avoidant was never the final problem. In fact, the avoidant was never even the central character in the story. What felt like a struggle to hold on to another human being was, from the very beginning, a struggle to recover something within themselves. The distance, the uncertainty, the unanswered questions, the emotional withdrawal, all of it served a purpose far deeper than the relationship itself. It forced a confrontation with parts of the psyche that had remained hidden for years. Most people spend their lives believing that suffering originates outside of them. They believe peace will arrive when the right person stays, when the relationship becomes secure, when the uncertainty disappears, when the desired outcome finally materializes. Yet psychological development reveals a different truth. The deepest forms of freedom emerge when one's inner stability is no longer dependent upon external conditions. The secure individual does not become secure because life becomes predictable. They become secure because they discover something within themselves that remains intact even when life is unpredictable. This realization marks a profound transformation. The person who once searched constantly for signs now begins to trust their own perception. The person who once chased explanations now becomes comfortable with unanswered questions. The person who once measured their worth through another's attention begins measuring it through their own relationship with themselves. What changes is not merely behavior. What changes is identity. The old identity was organized around seeking validation, seeking reassurance, seeking confirmation that one was lovable, valuable, and worthy of being chosen. Every interaction became part of this search. Every relationship became another opportunity to prove something to oneself. But eventually a person grows tired. They grow tired of negotiating for affection. They grow tired of earning what should be freely given. They grow tired of abandoning themselves in pursuit of people who remain emotionally unavailable. And it is often at this point that genuine transformation begins. Jung believed that psychological growth requires the withdrawal of projections. This means reclaiming from others the qualities, hopes, and meanings we have unconsciously placed upon them. What we once believed existed entirely within another person must be rediscovered within ourselves. The strength we admired, the security we sought, the sense of completion we desperately pursued, these things were never truly theirs to give. They belonged to us from the beginning. The avoidant therefore loses a certain kind of power, not because they have changed, not because they suddenly return, not because they finally understand what they lost. They lose their power because they are no longer carrying parts of your identity. The psychological dependency dissolves. The emotional spell breaks. The projection returns home. This is why the final stage often feels strangely quiet. There is no dramatic victory. There is no triumphant confrontation. There is no perfect moment of closure. Instead, there is a growing sense of peace. The mind becomes less occupied. The emotional urgency fades. The need to understand every detail disappears. The person who once dominated your thoughts begins occupying less and less space within your inner world. Many people imagine that healing means forgetting. In reality, healing means remembering differently. You remember the relationship without becoming trapped inside it. You remember the disappointment without reliving it. You remember the person without needing anything from them. And perhaps most importantly, you remember yourself. You remember who you were before fear took control. You remember the parts of yourself that existed before the obsession with being chosen. You remember that your life was never meant to revolve around another person's uncertainty. This is the paradox that so many fail to see. The avoidance withdrawal feels like a loss, yet for the individual willing to confront themselves honestly, it becomes an invitation to become psychologically whole, an invitation to stop searching outside for what can only be developed within, an invitation to build a relationship with the self that no rejection can destroy and no absence can take away. And this is ultimately how a secure person handles an avoidant pulling away. They do not win by making the other person stay. They do not win by becoming more desirable. They do not win by discovering the perfect strategy. They win because they refuse to lose themselves.